Welcome to Law Subscribed. This is your dedicated news source for all things subscriptions in the law. My name is Matthew Kurbis. I'm the subscription attorney, and I believe subscriptions can help bridge the access to justice gap and incentivize attorneys to modernize and scale their practice like never before. On this show, I interview lawyers ditching the billable hour and experts who can help attorneys move beyond billing time. Thanks to my sponsors, 650 and Galvin. Links to both in the show notes. More on them later, and use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED when signing up. You get 10% off, and it supports the show. The best way to support the show is to share it with someone you know. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing said is legal, ethical, or financial advice. Without further delay, here's the episode. Thrilled to have with me today who I just learned is a listener of the show, Sean Galvin. Welcome to the podcast, Law Subscribed.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited to be on. I've been listening to your podcast ever since I sort of was theorizing about this idea of launching my own subscription-based firm. And I'm like, who else is doing that kind of work? Who's talking about this? And obviously your podcast came up because that's right in the center of what you're talking about. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've been listening for a while.
Yeah, good. I mean, I tried to search when I was thinking of the idea, when I was ideating many years ago, and there was nothing. There was like one ABA article with a few lawyers in there. And so I reached out to all those lawyers and I was like, hey, this would be great for other people to listen to these conversations. So that was the genesis of the podcast, right? So good, glad. Now mission accomplished, podcast canceled. Okay.
Please don't.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, even if I canceled it today, there's still there's almost 10 months, worth of content left to publish. So anyway, getting back to why you're here, you're actually doing something really cool. And I've seen you engaged in some thought leadership on LinkedIn. But just in case my listeners haven't come across what you're doing yet, go ahead, give yourself a little introduction.
Sure. So my name is Sean Galvin. I'm the founder of my own firm, Galvin Privacy and AI Law, GPAL, PC, sometimes I call it. Might actually do a DBA or something eventually under this name because it's easier to say. But so really it's inspired by folks like you and others that have pioneered the sort of subscription model of legal services. And I'm trying to stay entirely subscription or flat fee based with this practice and really target startups and entrepreneurs that are building in the AI space in regulated industries that are in need of privacy and sort of general counsel, product counsel, and doing that on a subscription basis.
So for like that type of a niche practice area, which we've always learned, like I think one of the big takeaways from the podcast is the attorneys who have an actual niche tend to do a much better, like their well, let's call it product velocity is like much better than frankly, like attorneys like me. Like my law firm is so broad and general transactional that it's tough to do. But that in particular, was that something that you had come up with the advent of ChatGPT back in November of 2022? Or was that even, because AI has been around before that? People forget, even listeners of this podcast, I don't think all know that like AI and the law have been around for a long time, especially with e-discovery. So were you like thinking about like privacy and AI law even back before ChatGPT hit the scene, or was it ChatGPT hit the scene, Gen AI took off, and you're like, I see a market need here, I'm going to fill that need?
So I think just to give you my own background, just to sort of explain how this came about. I started out at a big firm, Goodwin Procter, and was mostly doing litigation. And so mainly the only exposure I had to AI in that role was through e-discovery tool, technology assisted review and things like that. And it wasn't until I went in-house, went in-house in a medical device manufacturer, Cochlear, that makes hearing implants. Mm-hmm. And they had launched a telehealth SaaS platform, Connected Care, for connecting their recipients of their technology with healthcare providers. And I really had to pivot my practice to privacy for that purpose. And core sort of feature of the roadmap for that technology is to start to incorporate AI into, being sort of a co-pilot for audiologists and practitioners. The surgical tool that they sell, the SmartNav system for surgeons, is effectively an AI co-pilot tool. Like it's powered by AI and it helps surgeons with this very sort of niche specialty procedure that anyway. So when ChatGPT came out, Cochlear was, well, I think just suffice to say, I was tapped or was sort of pivoted somewhat to help support AI initiatives from a legal privacy perspective, and got trained by the IIPP in AI governance. And I was sort of starting to get exposure to these very cutting edge conversations among privacy professionals and legal professionals who are counseling companies at the highest level on these issues, and realizing nobody has the answers. Like, this is fairly seems to have caught a lot of privacy folks by surprise because of how fast it rolled out. Like, the ChatGPT adoption was just so insanely fast that folks had very little time to get up to speed on, this particular niche of AI, this type of AI application, these large language models built on transformers, and to try to get their heads around, like, what does this change about what we've already been talking about for decades on the need for governance and controls from a privacy perspective on, these big data initiatives at every major company.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized is so many people are starting from zero. As a young attorney who's sort of has now some chops doing this type of work at a global medical device manufacturer in the regulated industry, and can learn fairly quickly, and not to toot my own horn, but I'm a fairly fast learner. And I realized I had already, because I was so obsessed with this topic for the last 6 months, I was already like fairly comfortable in these conversations with very senior people. And so I thought, I think I have to start my own practice, because I really want to, try to serve more than just one client and bring some guardrails to companies that really need them earlier on in their life cycle at a rate that they can afford, rather than having to go to a big firm. Because we were shopping for outside counsel, and the rates that they were quoting for an AI lawyer was ridiculous. And so that was really the genesis of this idea.
That's fascinating. There's a lot of great lessons there. If this was like a business podcast, which kind of is, like, I feel like we can unpack
It's totally a business podcast.
It is, but like we focus on the subscription side of things here, right?
Mhm.
So like we if I was, a different type of podcast, I would deep dive into that, about finding that market need, identifying a problem, lawyers being the commensurate problem solvers that we are. You identified this and you decided to do that thing. But we're just going to skip over all that. What I want to ask you is that when you were at, well, the podcast has a niche. When you were at Goodwin, I have to imagine you were
Yeah.
billing your time, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
Yeah. And so
Um,
going from billing time to in-house, tell me what that experience was like.
Liberating. I think in one word, that's the word. I think when I was onboarding, they often joked that I needed to be deprogrammed from the big law way of doing things, because it really is like a very different way of doing, like, just fundamentally the business model does impact the way you think, the way that you approach work, like the way you prioritize your time and your tasks. And that contrast definitely was also part of the genesis of this idea of, of my initial curiosity in this concept of a subscription-based practice.
Right. Right. I mean, we could even talk about the Cochlear thing, because I didn't realize that was a brand name. My quote foreign language in college was American Sign Language. And so
Oh yeah.
I learned all about deaf culture around cochlear implants, and how it's actually like super controversial for like deaf
It
families
is.
to do that. And I didn't realize that was a brand name, like a Kleenex. Like, it's just like,
Yes.
that's the thing. It's the cochlear implant. I didn't know at the time. I know now, and I knew when I was looking up your LinkedIn that it's a company.
Yeah. So there's the capital C Cochlear. That's like the company. And we, like, a large part of our role in house counsel sometimes was to do that trademark sign. Cause like you have to review all the material, and you're just talking about cochlear implants as a generic thing. Cause there are other companies that manufacture this type of implant.
Right.
But if you're talking about the cochlear branded implant, it's capital C, like capital C Cochlear. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Is
Xerox problem, right? It's a Xerox.
yes,
It's a yeah. You don't want to lose that brand. Fascinating. And you're even you were on the tech and ops side, but you still had to worry about the trademark stuff whenever you saw it.
it was one of those things where nobody wanted to do it, and so they had like a committee that you like were rotated on, like you had a shift, and so everyone had to do it.
It's quasi legal. Like it's certainly something you wouldn't want like an outside counsel billing their time to do, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, it was a legal team like function, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, were you involved? And I don't know how it was structured there, but were you involved at all with like dealing with outside counsel, whether it was hiring them or working with them and having now to be on the other side and being cognizant of, all right, this is just they're racking up the billables. What are we doing on this phone call or whatever?
Yeah, there were a few times where I interfaced with outside counsel. And it was funny. One of the firms that Cochlear used was my wife's firm, the firm that my wife worked for at the time, and it was sometimes awkward being on the side to that, because on one matter we actually got conflicted out from something, or they had to send us a conflict waiver because they were representing opposing party in a deal, and
Mhm.
I was the one who sort of got that note. I was like, oh, interesting. But anyway, yeah, I did have to be on the opposite side of that, those relationships, and it's interesting sort of seeing the perspective of in-house counsel of like, you really only go to outside counsel if you have to on certain things, and you're really loath to do it because of because of what you described. It's just the lack of trust that like they may be racking up the bill, or I don't know that that's always the case with other types of vendors in other sector. Like, we had advertising vendor, outside contracts, things like that. And they worked hand in hand with our marketing teams because they don't have that type of relationship where there's like, oh no, every hour that we bill, every email I send is going to get billed at point three or whatever.
And even if the outside advertisers were billing by the hour, they're seen as a profit center, right? Because if the advertisement is successful, we're still aligned that you made a lot more money than what you paid us by the hour, even though I'm sure they're not doing that. With lawyers, we're only ever seen as cost centers when you're just billing your time because you're not incentivized to create those partnerships of, okay, like for example, when I give a contracts and negotiations like presentation to just lay people or like business owners about here's how you understand contracts and negotiate them yourselves. Part of what I teach them in that is like, you should think of this process as like part of the sales process. And like the way that you communicate with contracts is like closing a deal. But a lot of lawyers, even billable hour outside counsel lawyers that are helping with like more complicated M&A transactions or whatever, they're not thinking about it that way. They're just thinking
Yeah.
about how many hours can I bill to meet my minimum threshold so I could get my bonus. They're not thinking about partnering that way. And if they
Yep.
did,
Absolutely.
even if they were billing time, if they communicated to the client, we're a profit center for you because we're going to get this deal done, and this deal is going to make you, hundreds of millions of dollars. Who cares if you're going to spend 100,000 in legal fees? But they don't ever communicate it that way. And when when you have an ongoing relationship, it's so much more natural to do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I draw a lot of inspiration from my former colleagues at Coke and just the way that they approached the legal function within the company. Like they were very cognizant of the fact that like they're interfacing with clients, with customers of the company. And when we would negotiate a contract, a deal with like a customer that was buying, huge amounts of our product, and we were very cognizant of the fact that like we're not we're not being combative, we're not, trying to be hardliners on anything, and really just treating people as humans and like trying to reach a common understanding of, you know, for each and every deal. And so we would sometimes get feedback from, through our sales team that they had heard from their legal team that we were the best team that they'd ever worked with, like as opposing counsel. And we're just like, that's awesome. And every time that happened, you know, we cheered ourselves, patted the whole team on the back, because that's
Right.
really a goal, is to
Right.
be, as a legal function, to be part of that sales process and closing that deal with the customer satisfaction top of mind.
Right, right. It's like I do a lot of like residential real estate transactions, and truly is like more collaborative law. Like we're all trying to get to the closing table. We're all trying to
Yeah.
close this deal, and so instead of trying to work against each other, how can we work together? And that dynamic can play out in an in-house team, but it's harder on the billable hour with outside teams. So going back to this moment, this aha moment that you had, that I have to start my own practice and pursue this area where there's like a lack of expertise, and there's a need for companies to hire for this need, which is like you discovered your product market fit before you even launched, which is
Yeah.
something, but which doesn't always happen. But you decided to launch using subscription and or flat fee and stay away from billing time. Why did you choose that model in particular?
I think that was, for me, it was really central to the whole hypothesis. The whole reason why I was thinking it was a good time to start my own practice was really came out of like a lot of thinking that I was doing around how technology is going to impact the way that lawyers and knowledge workers in general monetize their services. And, doing a lot of thinking and reading, reading Ron Baker's book and like listening to your podcast and realizing, I'm not the only one thinking about this. There's lots of people that are thinking the same thing, that like, if we can harness technology plus a different way of billing our services that doesn't tie us to the constraint of just the number of hours that are in a day, that combination is going to lead to more long-term upside than just billing by the hour. No matter what your specialty, no matter what the niche that you're in, like just that combination alone is sort of a competitive advantage
Right.
in a world where, technology is where it is today.
Right, right. I mean, it's interesting you said that because at the time of recording, my interview with Sean Hardeen is not live, but something my audience will have heard before this goes live is sort of exactly what you said, but the way that he phrased it, and I really like the way that he phrased it, is why put an artificial cap on how much money you could earn? But you
Mm,
came to that realization on your own, right? Of like, okay, if I'm billing time, I can only make so much money every day. Yeah, sure, I can
oh
raise my
yeah.
rates, but even if I raise my rates, I'm still capped at how much money I can make in a day if I'm billing my
Right.
time.
It fundamentally, it's like I've got a math, like I was a math undergrad, and it comes down to just simple math of just like the equation is a linear equation. No matter what the variables are, no matter how high your rate is, it's a linear equation when you're billing that way. And the only way to get away from that and do what many other, entrepreneurs are able to do, and switch to a equation that is exponential,
Hmm.
is to ditch the billable hour. And I think a lot of people are coming to this realization, but it's hard. It's a harder thing to do because it's a novel concept, and you have to like come up with your own productized version of what you're selling. And that's more work on the front end than just setting a billable hour rate and then saying, that's it, and I'm done. I don't have
Yeah,
to think about it anymore.
I didn't realize we had a unicorn on the podcast, a lawyer that knows math. Welcome to the podcast. We discovered you. You're out there. No, I know one other lawyer, and he's a big law lawyer who was a math major in undergrad. Like, so there's two of you. There's two of you out
Yeah.
there who
I
do
I
that.
have I had some friends in big law who were like former engineers and like
Oh yeah,
they were the most frustrated with this whole concept. I've talked about this a bit, but like I had a friend who wrote a piece of code that like did a task that, you know, was taking a team of associates like 3 days to do. And he was like, why don't I just write a thing in Python that can, create these signature packets automatically without us having to do this all manually? And he was told not to do, like to stop doing that. Like, don't do things like that anymore. You're a lawyer. You're not a software engineer. That's not what we hired you for. Put your head down, make your out. That was 4 years ago. Like
Yeah,
that is what was possible then. And just think about how much that is compounded now with the advent of like generative AI.
yeah. Build your own GPT that does that, and it doesn't even you don't even need to know how to code. You could do that
Right.
now.
True. No, yeah, exactly.
And if you
exactly.
don't know how to code, you could get these Gen AI tools that have ingested all of GitHub or whatever, and then they'll just
Right.
give you the code. Hey, this is I'm trying to code this thing. Give me the code in Python to do this, and boom, there you go.
I would say, as someone who is now counseling folks on the risks of adopting generative AI, there are risks involved, and there are limitations, very serious limitations on the current performance of these models once you get outside of the demo and
Hmm.
into production. Like,
Hmm.
and so I think that that's the other sort of thing that I became fascinated with was like there is massive value right there, right now. Like I know it from just playing with the effectively ChatGPT is like a demo. Like it's just
Right,
the most basic interface with an LLM that you can imagine.
right,
And with just that, there's so much like you can prompt it with some basic prompting and get something that would have taken me hours as a associate billing $600 an hour at Goodwin. Like that's a reality that is present right now. It's not like crypto where it's all very hypothetical. So I do disagree with folks who say this is all hype. This is all just a massive bubble but at the same time, there is a certain degree of lack of, because it's so new for a lot of folks, there's a lack of like nuanced understanding of the limitations and so I foresee a lot of legal consequences as a result of that I'm trying to, that's part of the hypothesis too, is to try to get ahead of that and be ready for sort of the burst or there's going to be a rocky road
right,
of, these companies that are scrambling to not get left behind.
right.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, and we'll see what happens because there's certainly a glut of OpenAI API wrappers right now, where it's just like we
hmm
just integrate with ChatGPT and like that's our thing. Although even some of those that I've been playing around with in early beta, like if you've got some fantastic prompts going on in the background and you actually know your stuff, like I've seen some incredibly impressive wrappers,
there's a
but
lot of value there. Yeah,
yeah, but most of it's junk. I mean, like the vast
right.
majority of these things are just junk.
Or even
Um,
if it's not junk, like it's not defensible, maybe as a
sure.
business model, because
Sure.
you might have a very easy to enter market that a lot of folks can come and eat your lunch if they're better at executing something.
Right.
Um, yeah,
Right. But the linear equation thing, I've never heard it phrased that way. So I'm going to be, I feel like that's a good takeaway. Like, I think I'm going to be quoting you on that, Sean, into the
sure.
future.
Yes, please do.
That's a good one. It's a good framing of it because everyone needs a different framing that's going to sink in with them. And I think that one is going to hit some people. They're going to get it. Go ahead.
I pair it. I know. No, I pair that just to close that point.
Please. Yeah.
I also saw this image that goes well with that, where it's like your expectation is linear, and got this sort of future expectation is just a linear upward graph, and then in reality, things may be more exponential. And so, in the short term, you're sort of disappointed with the outputs, the outcomes, because you've switched from a linear expectation to now you're having to grow exponentially. And in the short term, there's sort of this trough of disappointment, but then in the long term, the exponential curve far outstrips the linear curve. And so that's sort of my inspirational takeaway from
Great. So we're talking math and we're talking graphs. Okay. I hope I haven't lost everybody.
that.
um, no, it's a good visual, and this is my episodely reminder of if you want to watch the video and you want to see Sean doing
With my
things with his
hands, just
hands,
sort of.
right? Then go to www.lawsubscribe.com and subscribe. Substack is powering it now, so you could see those videos on Substack when you subscribe to the for free even to the podcast. And so then so you have this in mind. You're going to start your thing. You don't want the cap on how much money you could earn in the long term. Then you have to set out to do it. So like, what did you do? Where did you go? What tech did you adopt? Is there any custom tech that's being built? How you got the idea, you know how you want to do it, but then the doing it. Let's talk about that.
Well, that's always where things get hard, right? And I will admit, I'm only just starting out, like a few months in, so maybe I'm still in that trough of
We'll have you back in a year for
yeah,
sure. For
well, yeah,
sure.
we'll see how that.
Seriously.
Yeah. So what I did was, you know, a while back, I was thinking about this. And so I said, what, let me create my own entity, and I'll just be getting ready for this because I think I'm going to end up needing to do it. So I set up the law firm PC. I started to noodle around with building a website. I contacted my old college buddy who does graphic designs for websites, and he ended up building my own website for me eventually. I set aside some money to work on those things, and started networking with folks at these privacy conferences and other places to sort of tease the idea or sort of get some feedback on like whether this was a good time, whether I was missing something, or and then ultimately, after like a lot of hemming and hawing on my side, I got some advice from someone who I was talking to about, he does a lot of help coaching folks build their LinkedIn presence and things like that. And he just said, you've got this idea in mind, you've got your website, like, what are you waiting for? Just nobody, you don't need to wait for anybody to give you permission to start your business. It's your business. You can start it when you need to, when you want to. And the next day I just went ahead and launched and posted on LinkedIn and said, here's the firm, here's the website, like, here's what I'm doing. But at the same time, I was really wanting to emphasize within the practice, on the back end, the potential for generative AI to impact the cost of, how much lawyer time is actually spent. I think it's not really a cost, but, the constraint of lawyer time on how much client service you can perform. And so I was talking with a bunch of folks who were building legal tech startups and generative AI tools for lawyers, and sort of ideating about whether I might want to also start my own legal tech company at the same time as starting a law firm, which is a lot to contemplate. So I'm really focusing on the law firm first. But in the meantime,
let me just quick note on that is when I started my own practice, I also simultaneously started another legal entity that this podcast is under, right? And so
right.
So I do have two entities that I'm operating right now. And yeah, sure, like 80+% of my time is in the law firm, right? But I do not just the podcast, but I do a lot of consulting on, under this other LLC. So it was like really useful for me to have that other entity set up. So I could it's not the same thing as like a tech startup, but I could definitely relate to wearing multiple hats, or really all the hats for two companies when starting a law practice. I definitely like there's pros and cons and there's opportunity costs, right? But when you are on your own, you get to let yourself moonlight if you want to. And I do, and you are too. And it's a thing. So you're not alone.
Yeah. So I ended up meeting a colleague who's now of counsel in the firm, who had started his own legal tech generative AI company back in 2022. And he had gotten a JD MBA from Wharton and immediately started this startup after he wrote his senior thesis on the use of AI in the practice of law. And he wanted to sort of team up with the firm to sort of help build, sort of as a design partner, help build tools that will help optimize the firm's work. And that's still sort of, that's the part that's sort of still in stealth mode or still under wraps. But at the same time, like I'd love to get your feedback on this as well. I do think that there is a market for tools like practice management tools that are designed for folks that are not billing by the hour, that are more centered around workflow management and, more of a traditional project management type of style of software rather than just billing time. Because I do think that a lot of the practice management software tools out there are fundamentally a timekeeping platform. And so another sort of component that I'm trying to work on my own is trying to figure out whether there's a market for that type of a tool for subscription or flat fee based lawyers in particular, to sort of target that niche.
When I went solo, I pivoted from mostly litigation to a transactional-only practice. I did not have a database of documents to automate. That's why a business and employment legal document database and automation tool like 650 is super useful. I can rely on the quality of the documents in 650's database since they're putting excellent legal minds to work curating and updating their documents and automations over time. When you're not billing by the hour, outsourcing and efficiency matters, and 650 can help you scale your practice to get high-quality documents drafted in less time. Use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED at 650.com and when being onboarded to get 10% off. If you're not a business and employment attorney or you have your own documents that you'd prefer to use, then my next sponsor, Gavel, is the automation tool for you. Gavel allows you to build shareable, client-facing workflow and document automations. In other words, Gavel helps you create a legal practice where attorneys can monetize the value they bring clients in productized form and scale via subscriptions and flat fees. Use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED at gavel.io to get 10% off an annual subscription. There's no one right way to automate and scale your practice, but with one or both of my sponsors, 650 and Gavel, you can take your subscription law firm to the next level. Links to both in the show notes. Now back to the show. Yeah, I'll tell you that one of the benefits of you coming on the show and like the audience hasn't heard it yet is I can share with you. So at the time of this episode going live, my episode with Fidu at ABA Tech Show will be live. And they're really like the only competitors in this space, period. There used to be Rally, but Rally's product Spellbook, which everyone has now heard of, they have completely pivoted away from practice management client portal stuff for innovative law practices to just Spellbook, right? And they still have that available, but they're not marketing it anymore. And so like there used to be two players in this space, Fidu and Rally. I've had them both on the pod, but only one of them is still competing in this space. And they just said, like a few weeks ago when I interviewed them live at ABA Tech Show, that they would love more competition in the space.
Oh yeah, no,
because it means like more people are aware of it. Like same thing with me. Like I want more subscription lawyers and subscription attorneys out there, right? Yeah, sure. I've got the brand subscription attorney. I want more lawyers using subscriptions because then like it increases the educational awareness. Like, like Stephanie Everett said at our ABA Tech Show talk, like we need like a Got Milk campaign for like, the alternative business models for law so that the communities at large, society like knows, oh no, you don't have, lawyers can be predictably priced.
One thing that I've thought about too is like a marketplace concept that's specifically for subscription and alternative fee practices to market under one umbrella to sort of distinguish themselves from
So
but
the closest thing out there is AltFee.
Yeah.
They have a directory. So they are primarily a software platform for lawyers to use if they don't know how to do alternative fee-based pricing, but they do have a directory of firms that use alternative fees. They don't really market it because they're like their users are lawyers and law firms, and who would use the directory but potential clients. So they don't really market it, but I'm on the directory. So after this, Sean, you have to make sure GPAL is on the directory too, because why not? It's a free listing. It's another link back to your website if you care about that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean maybe, but here's the thing: it's complicated, right? Like so, right now it's like that because what that would come down to as well. I think you'd have to build into that is you'd have to build in some kind of referral platform, right?
Yeah.
So like Overture, Lex Amica, both have been on the podcast, both referral networks.
I just joined Overture too. Yeah.
So, and they're doing very different things as far as referral-based networks and how they're approaching to try to solve that problem. But there is a way, if you could do some kind of version of that with like a platform or marketplace for subscription-based attorneys, where people have told me to do something like this, but I'm only 2 years into my journey, right? So like I don't want to have to hire people, but this would be one of the ways to get around that. Is if you have a franchise model of a distributed law firm, that they're all kind of under one singular brand, but each one's an independent with their own brand, right? And so it's like, yeah, I do have the domain to subscriptionattorneys.com. If I ever really wanted to franchise my brand to do this kind of a thing, which is what it'd be good for because it's not a great niche, right? Like even you have GPAL, but doesn't really say what you do. You did decide to have your name in the law firm name, but it does say privacy and AI law. So it does tell people what they do. So it's like, it's a hybrid traditional and like trade name type law firm name. So, so it would be like in this example, it wouldn't have to be with my firm because I might never decide to franchise, but like subscription attorneys, LLC, plural is what, you'd subscribe to for say $20 a month, and you get access to the network of attorneys in that, as part of that market or franchise or umbrella, and GPAL is one of those, right?
Right,
And
right.
so because they're subscribed that way, maybe they get a special subscriber benefit of like a 10% discount on your subscription prices or something, or 5%. Like if you're coming in through that network and that's your lead generation or whatever, right? There'd have to be some sort of way to do that, to make that financially viable for the franchising too, but and still supportable. And because then the thing is like, what happens when there's a different jurisdiction? It's in a different
Oh yeah.
jurisdiction. You're not licensed, or a different practice area that you can't handle, but that client is there right now. I have to go to Overture, Lex Amica, LinkedIn, bar associations. Like it's such a hard problem to solve. So I think that we could all benefit from that, us with alternative fee structures and business models. But the problem is there's just not enough of us. Like the
Yeah.
podcast is like the largest hub of like actually active alternative fee users, because the directory and alt fee, like, I don't know, I've never heard of some of these places. And when I've tried to reach out, they don't always get back to me. So who knows? They're probably
It's
still billing their
interesting.
time. Right.
Yeah.
So it's early. I mean, really, I could have just answered your question earlier with, is there a market for it? Yes, for both things, for the practice management software and for this marketplace. There is a market. It's very early. And I don't
Yeah.
know about investing. Like Fidu, they're only 2 or 3 years into their operations, and it's hard. They were like, we're subscription. And then when like so few lawyers signed up, they had to be like, we're subscription and flat fee. Yeah, we're going to
Yeah.
help you
Yeah.
do flat fees too. So it's the best business model. Obviously, you and I and the listeners agree, but there's just not enough adoption yet by lawyers to it, that I think it's still super early, super early. But we'll get there. I mean, we talk
I
about
think that's a good
exponential,
thing. I
right?
mean, I think it's a good thing that you're there early, and you know you're because I do think it's going to be a trend because of that I think inevitable technological changes that will put firms that bill by the hour at a disadvantage if we're talking about competing on like value for money. I know a lot of people in the legal industry don't like to try to compete on like like how much they cost, but I think that in reality, uh, in any kind of market, it does matter whether you're delivering value at a rate that's cheaper than your competitors. And so I'm bullish. I know you're bullish on the subscription model. I think in large part because of that technological change that's going to happen or is happening right now. And it sort of solves a lot of these sort of, oh no, what are we going to do with our billable or, billing our junior associates? How are we going to monetize their time anymore? It's like, well, you don't have to do it that way anymore. You don't have to have your revenue centers be your attorney, your human beings that are billing by by the hour like that. I think it constrains you unnecessarily.
Right. Right. So I want to talk about your model with the time we have left, because so everyone could go to galvinlawpc.com to check it out. And I think you've done like a website update fairly recently, right? Or like, I mean, you're only a few months into this. So I mean, you're updating
Yeah.
this stuff all the time.
Iterating pretty rapidly. Yeah.
Totally, totally. So I got to say, I kind of like it, and it's because while the originating format is different than my website. On the very first page, you could schedule a call with you. So that was my biggest lesson that I learned, is just make it super easy to people. They have
Yeah.
questions. Your website's not going to answer all their questions, or they're not going to read it. They just want to
Yeah.
talk to you, right? And so like let them schedule a call with you. I see the floating button whatever page you're on. You could always click that to schedule a call. You can customize that, so it doesn't have to say schedule time with us powered by Calendly. I would customize
Oh,
that.
interesting.
You definitely can. I do it on my website. What I like is you do have details here on your website, but it's not like too much details. So you've taken a similar approach to me, where you just kind of say like the bare minimum that you need to say to get the thing across. Something you do, which all other lawyers do, but I don't do, is you do have a profile of like, here's the lawyers behind GPAL. But then you've got your services listed, very straightforward, not too much to think about. And your pricing tab, where you are now in the small group of us lawyers who list your pricing on your website, which is pretty incredible. You've got 4 subscription tiers, and it looks like you're categorizing them based on target market that's appropriate for that amount. So your seed, approaching Series A, and then enterprise level. And I know you're early, so there's not a lot of lessons to take away here based on clients signing up. But I do want to know just like why'd you go with the 4-tier system and why did you decide instead of letting the customer pick based on what they want, you're deciding they get to pick based on where they're at in their business journey?
Yeah, I think it's part of an experiment. Like I wouldn't say that I'm wedded to this. And by the time that this podcast airs, it may have changed.
That's okay.
Um,
We're because this is still so new, like we were just talking about, that just getting your thought process on why you've
yeah,
decided to do what you've done, that might, whether this works or not for you in a year from now, it might work for some other attorney who's listening.
I think that what it's been beneficial for me to learn from talking to other attorneys that have also been doing this for at least a few months or a year, a couple of years longer than me, is that they've learned that much of the work involved in pitching this type of service is educating the client on sort of what they should want or be expecting from a subscription to a law firm. And so like putting it out there that if you are in this sort of category, this is sort of what you will likely expect from the subscription allows a client who may not have experience dealing with attorneys much or may not have any experience dealing with a subscription based attorney to sort of benchmark their expectations for what type of services they should want or need from this type of law firm. And so that's sort of been that was the reason why we set it up that way. It's so that it at least put a flag down on sort of where the conversation is going to start with the client based on where they are in their entrepreneurial journey. But frankly, a lot of the clients that I've been talking to or engaging with are in that early stage zone. And so like they may not have any experience working with lawyers. And so just sort of providing them with that sounding board at a monthly rate and also providing them with their basic sort of contracting needs. And I'm still trying to stay specialized within privacy and AI. So it's been more of a game of picking the client that will eventually have those. But anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
that's where I've been
Something that dawned on me, as I'm looking at your pricing page and as you're speaking is, the multi-jurisdictional aspect of privacy law, which is it's federal law or even European law, if you're operating internationally. But then you're in California, right? Are you a licensed
yeah.
California attorney?
Yeah, California and New York is where I'm licensed.
Yeah, so I mean, California has all the crazy, privacy laws. So your license is one of your licenses is in California, and it's a federal practice, and so you're kind of perfectly situated from a licensing practice area, multi-jurisdictional standpoint that you could help any client. Like your jurisdiction doesn't really matter for this niche, which is uncommon, right? So I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity here. Like the TAM is large.
That's the hypothesis. So, we're early days, still growing, and hopefully by the time this podcast airs, folks have already heard of us. But
Yeah.
that maybe too ambitious.
Well, you never know. And hey, look, like it is from a general transactional standpoint, having firms out there like yourself that, frankly, any potential client of mine might need at some point when AI becomes ubiquitous, right? Like, they might want to, they might need that privacy expert attorney on
Yeah,
subscription. And so
and
it's
and
great referral partner. So for the other lawyers listening, I don't know of any other lawyers doing subscription in this particular niche. The closest thing is Termageddon, but that's like that's B2C, and that's a legal tech company. It's not a law
yeah,
firm, right?
yeah, and I think we're also very early days in terms of the enforcement of some like or even just regulation of
Right.
these types of models. So also class action lawsuits. There's going to be a lot of litigation, a lot of sort of defining of the legal risks in real time as we build this firm. So was part of the hypothesis as well, as getting early and becoming sort of a go-to thought leader in the space, because it's really my obsession. It's sort of the risks and privacy implications of these artificial intelligence models.
Fascinating. Well, I got to decide if I want to talk with you about my next thing on the pod or off pod. We're going to talk about it off pod. Um,
Okay.
and I might leave that part in there so I could tantalize people to come on the show as a guest
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
know I have additional conversations with the guests. But so sticking to what's going to be on the pod, what do you think it is that's unique about you that made you want to not bill your time? Is there something special? And I think that there's always something, right? Like, and I think we've seen it more amongst, the women attorneys, the attorneys of color, where the big law model didn't work for them, the traditional model didn't work. It was built for white men like us, right? And so
Yeah.
they've been able to go off and be pioneers in this space of alternative business models for lawyers. But my hypothesis is there's also some other things that do connect those of us that don't necessarily fall into that category, where maybe we had some advantages being white men in this industry, but there's still something that is unique among any lawyer, regardless of, race, background, creed, what have you. And for me anyway, like, for example, I'm a first generation attorney. I'm probably neurodivergent, though I've never been diagnosed that. And just as otherwise, I'm entrepreneurial. I've started other companies before that haven't been super successful. So maybe it's the entrepreneur brain. And so like maybe there's something happened in somebody's life, so like, what is that thing about you that you think, okay, this is maybe why I'm able to think differently?
I think part of it is maybe my math and economics background that like it just I look at it and I think this just doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem like a long-term sustainable model. It's part of it is just I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, and I never really fit in a corporate setting just because like my background is very like rugged and like I don't know. My I always just sort of my friends at Goodwin always thought of me as like the wisecracking like sarcastic person because at big law firms, everyone's taking themselves so seriously in this environment that is fundamentally ridiculous, in my view. Like it's kind of an act, or there's a lot of acting going on, and so I never really bought into it, and so that was part of it too. But then I think the third, maybe most relevant in terms of just why it was uncomfortable for me was that I am also neurodivergent. And so like I have ADHD and was just like not able to like every time I had to like do, document review thing that was going to take hours and hours and then, I had to bill every single 6 minute, like it was just pulling teeth to get me to do that type of like
Yeah.
paper pushing work that like even while I was in it, I was always thinking like about how there must be another way to do this. There's got to be a different model because it seemed just so painful, and I think it is painful even if you're not neurodivergent. But I
Yeah.
think maybe other folks are just better able to cope with it than I was.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, even in some ways, just the entrepreneur brain is like neurodivergent already, and I wonder if there's any correlation between, because another hypothesis I have is like, in particular, a lot of us firm owners, we have to be generalists by the nature of the job, right? And so yes, we could be very good and specialists in certain ways, but like you have to be good at a lot of things. And so I mean, and ADHD may play into that. I don't know, right? I'm not a scientist in that way that I
mm,
understand that, but like you have to be able to wear multiple hats and switch between them, and that might help
yeah.
like with focus, like so what, like, do you think that plays a role? Do you consider yourself a generalist?
I think, yeah, and I think at Goodwin, I like that as a litigator, they throw you into the general pool and you get to pull from, you get to take work from any type of group within that. And so I really got exposure to a ton of different things, could keep switching between things like throughout my day. And when I was most miserable was that when I was completely overwhelmed with one matter, like one piece of work that I had to sustain my attention on for like days on end.
Yeah.
That was very difficult. But so yeah, I think it is. I am more naturally fit for small bursts of intense focus on one thing at a time, like very quickly at a bunch of different things throughout the day.
Yeah, I'm
And
wearing my
yeah,
my CFO hat. I'm looking at the finances. Now I'm in my
yeah,
marketing sales mode. I'm looking at the market. Now I'm in my practice mode. I got to do the client work, right?
yeah.
It does. I mean, it helps. That's how I
And I
do
think
it.
a lot of them value. Like I would talk to attorneys that are more senior. A lot of what they would say is like the most valuable things that they would deliver for a client would be the result of a 10-minute insight, not a 3 hour, session or of working on one thing at a time. But that's not the way that we bill. We bill by the hour. And so that to me, that was also sort of the start of my skepticism of that model was that we're, we're delivering value in a very different way than we're billing for that value. So
Right. So now, as we start to round out the episode here, you listen to the pod, you knew it was coming. Sean, is a hot dog a sandwich, and why?
Yes. I think it's fundamentally it is a sandwich. I have some disdain for folks who think that it's not a sandwich just because the fact is there's a bun, there's meat in the middle, and maybe open face. We can quibble about that, but fundamentally, like it, it's just a specialized sandwich.
All right. There you go. If people want to get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
Best way to get in touch would be to email me at sean@galvinlawpc.com.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And that's our show. Thanks again to 650 and Gavel for being sponsors. The best way for others to discover this show is for you to share it with somebody you think would find value from it. Follow me on LinkedIn, since that's where I'm most active on social media, and click the bell towards the top right of my profile to get notified about all of my posts about this podcast and everything else I think is valuable for you to see. To get in touch, message me on LinkedIn or email kurbis@lawsubscribed.com. All links are in the show notes. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.